Good morning. I have a few readings to prepare our hearts for a meditation as we prepare for my presentation on the topic of true sustainability, cultivating a repentant, pro-future heart and mind. Vine Deloria was a very well-known indigenous elder and theologian, activist, author. And he says, somewhere in the planetary history, religious expression changed from participation in the sound, color, and rhythm of nature to the abstractions of man outside this context, pleading for temporary respite in hoping in the next life to return to the garden. Daniel Wildcat is an indigenous elder who says what typifies that shift, that we actually live among relatives, not resources. And my great mentor, Thomas Berry, one of the most significant ecological and evolutionary thinkers of the 20th century, said along similar lines, the universe is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. The environment, after all, is not our surroundings. It is our source, sustenance, and end. So on this holiday weekend that we celebrate our profound interdependence, not just independence, but our interdependence with the body of life, I invite you to, either with your eyes open or your eyes closed, to just be present to your breath. Breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. And just be present to the gift that each breath provides, and that we are sustained by our communion with the trees and the plankton that make the oxygen, and our profound interrelatedness with all things. And then I'll be silent. And I invite you on this holiday weekend to ponder how you might become more intimate with the body of life upon which we all depend. True sustainability, cultivating a repentant, pro-future heart and mind. I'd like to share some slides first, and then I'll just take it off slides and share from my heart for the rest of the sermon. I suggest that sustainable means faithful to time and nature. Unsustainable means unfaithful to time and nature, and that everything else is but a footnote or a distraction. The challenge is that we don't relate to things in a faithful or unfaithful way. We relate to beings, persons, in a faithful or unfaithful way. Loyal Rue is one of the most famous philosophers of religion alive today, at least in the English language. He wrote a number of books. One of them is Religion is Not About God. And what he means is that religion is about our relationship to reality. And yes, reality has been personified as various gods and goddesses. But if religion is doing its job, it's to help us relate in a healthy way to reality, inescapable reality. He says the most profound insight in the history of humankind is that we should seek to live in accord with reality. Indeed, living in harmony with reality may be accepted as a formal definition of wisdom. If we live at odds with reality, foolishly, we will be doomed. But if we live in proper relationship with reality, wisely, we may be saved. What do we refer to? What name do we give to that which brought everything into being, that which nourishes and sustains everything, and that which receives everything at its end? This is inescapably real, but what do we call it? Well, what we call reality, what we call nature, what we call the biosphere, indigenous, that is faithful or sustainable or pro-future cultures, experienced personally and related to and honored in an I-thou way. You could say life's fundamental laws relate to the larger body of life as divine or perish. That's one of the things that all indigenous cultures, truly pro-future cultures, they related to the body of life, not merely as resources or a place for our waste, but as a community of being in different mythological ways. What we know scientifically, there's no debate about this, is that reality is nested. subatomic particles within atoms, within molecules, within cells, and so on and so forth. And we are in the middle. We're made up of smaller, creative, intelligent realities like our microbiome that we don't exist without. And we are dependent upon larger, creative, intelligent realities like the atmosphere, like the body of life, the biosphere, like the plants and trees and the plankton. And so what I mean by primary reality is everything inside us and everything outside us that we don't exist without, that we are ultimately dependent upon that. Martin Buber, the famous Jewish theologian, said in his book, I and Thou, that we will relate to this reality in an I, thou way, or we will go extinct. It's the opposite of what we've now been experiencing. The last several hundred years, we've been relating to primary reality as a clockwork mechanistic cosmos, and that is radically unsustainable. So all indigenous cultures, pro-future cultures, genuinely sustainable cultures had an eco-theo worldview. That is, the ecos was related to as divine, as alive, and the theos, the world of the spirit or whatever, was always infused or revealed or expressed within the living world. So primary reality must be honored as primary. And this would be fine if we just referred to Gaia, but if you've got a concept of God that's outside Gaia, then you got a problem. So I spell God now always G, Earth emoji, D. And what I'm meaning is reality with a personality, not a person outside of reality. And whenever I speak in colleges, I can usually count on some philosophy major to say, well, what do you mean by reality? And I love Philip K. Dick's definition. He says, reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, doesn't go away. And that includes time and nature, as I said before. Sustainable means living faithful to time and nature. Unsustainable means unfaithful to time and nature. Teddy Goldsmith was a scholar that spent a lifetime studying the differences between genuinely sustainable and unsustainable cultures. His book, The Stable Society, is all about that, as well as his magnum opus, The Way. He was the editor and the publisher of The Ecologist magazine for almost 40 years. And he identified religion. He actually defined religion as the control mechanism of sustainable cultures. What he means by mechanism is just that aspect of society that relates to the rest of society with moral authority to ensure that the future is not compromised by the present. Because in traditional, stable, sustainable, pro-future societies, everything, technology is in accord with the needs of the biosphere, the settlements, the economy, education, basically everything must be done in ways that don't destroy what you're dependent upon, the needs of the biosphere. And of course, that makes sense when you realize the nested nature of reality. We can't be in the middle and exploiting the rest of the body and not have it cause us serious problems. Religion, however, in unsustainable cultures becomes downgraded to merely the coping mechanism of unsustainable cultures. So it turns out that religion needs science and evidence needs a moral voice. And this can't happen. This won't happen when the biosphere is exploited as it rather than honored as thou. So again, religion is the control mechanism, that aspect of culture that speaks with moral authority in sustainable cultures. Here are three things that Teddy Goldsmith identified over 500 years of anthropological research in terms of the difference between genuinely sustainable cultures and unsustainable civilizations. In genuinely sustainable, pro-future indigenous cultures, all benefits and all real wealth come from the living biosphere. What I mean by God with the earth emoji. That God or reality will continue to dispense these benefits and wealth only if life's critical order, that is, its essential integrity or way, is honored and preserved. Therefore, the fundamental role of religion or life ways is to ensure that the culture or society remains faithful to time and nature. How? By fiercely preserving the integrity of the ecosphere and the critical order of the cosmos. And I'll conclude with these four things: God first, or life first, seventh generation, sacred limits, and consequence capture. So I refer to these as the four laws of true sustainability. God first or life first simply means an ecocentric, a life-centered, not human-centered or anthropocentric measures of progress and success. When we measure progress and success in terms of individual wealth or corporate wealth or GDP or whatever, we're on an ecocidal path. We have to measure well-being in terms of how well is the soil doing decade by decade? How well are the forests doing decade by decade? How are the other species doing decade by decade? That's the only genuinely sustainable measure of well-being and wealth. Seventh generation. Failing to prioritize the future over the present is evil. All indigenous cultures know this. Sacred limits, material grace limits are real and must be honored. It's the failing to honor the limits of the living world that has been our major downfall. It's thinking that things were limitless. And then finally, consequence capture. The impacts for good or ill must be mirrored back. Any individual, corporation, or nation state that disregards or harms the common good should be taxed or penalized, or there's moral strictures. And individuals, corporations, and nations that do well to the larger common good should benefit. And the more good they do, the more they should benefit. So they're incentivized to do as much good as possible. These four things, life first or God first, seventh generation, sacred limits, and consequence capture. These are the essence of true sustainability. I love this quote from my great mentor, Joanna Macy, from A Wild Love for the World. This is a dark time filled with suffering and uncertainty. Like living cells in a larger body, it is natural that we feel the trauma of our world. So don't be afraid of the anguish you feel, or the anger or fear, because these responses arise from the depth of your caring and the truth of your interconnectedness with all beings. So let me stop the slides and just speak a few things from my heart here. So how can we who are not indigenous people, I mean, we all are indigenous if we go back far enough, but how can we Westerners cultivate a repentant, pro-future heart and mind? Well, I suggest one way is to honor existing indigenous peoples and their struggles, because these are folks scattered around the world who still have this I-thou relationship to primary reality. They still come from this place of profound relatedness and interconnectedness, and anything and everything we can do to learn from them and to apply what Robin Wall Kimmerer calls the 4 R's of right relationship to reality: reciprocity, respect, responsibility, and reverence. Again, the 4 R's of right relationship to reality: reciprocity, respect, responsibility, and reverence. We can all cultivate those. And when I speak of a repentant heart and mind, what I'm meaning is it's called in Greek metanoia. There's a conversion that's possible when we recognize that we've been treating the living world merely as merely as resources and a place for our waste. We can repent of that. We can say, no, we were wrong. And then with genuine metanoia, with genuine repentance, comes not just a shift in mind and heart, but a shift in attitudes and actions. Our way of being in the world differs, because just because we can't save the world in terms of our personal choices and habits, we can look ourselves in the mirror and feel good about ourselves. We can feel good about our contribution to our families, our neighbors, our relatives, our fellow congregants. So true sustainability is nurturing this profound interrelatedness and interconnectedness. It's honoring life first, or God first with the earth emoji, so it includes the biosphere, sacred limits, seventh generation, and consequence capture. And then as we do this, we can also, we can know that we are at an amazing time in Earth's history. One of the things that you'll be invited to do between now and about a week and a half from now is to watch a little short video that I've created, 25 minutes, called Serenity Prayer for the 21st Century. Because there's lots of things that we can accept that are unchangeable, that if we don't accept them, we're going to go crazy or drive ourselves and our families crazy. But when we accept them, then we can have joy and peace even in contracting times, because make no mistake, we are living in contracting times. We're living in a time when every season, every year, things are going to unwind and not get better and better. And that's difficult for those of us, you know, with white hair, those of us that grew up in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. It's very difficult to accept that we're no longer in times of expansion, we're in times of contraction. And that technology in the market cannot save us from what technology in the market have caused in the first place. And that's sobering inspiration. That's sobering to accept that. And yet when we accept that, we can find joy that goes beyond. It's what I call post-doom. I'll say a lot more about that in the Q&A, but post-doom is that sacred space of accepting what we cannot change, and then the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference as we support each other and live lives of deep and meaningful contribution. But we have to do the grief work. We have to do the heart work. And that's where we need each other. And Unitarian Universalist churches are especially well placed to be a blessing to your community, because you're not going to get in the media, you're not going to get in terms of most of the ways that people get information, denial, denial, denial is going to be there. And so if we do that heart work, then we can be a blessing to our communities when they start freaking out, when they start going into despair, because we are in the early stages. I suggest that we're in the early stages of the greatest mental health crisis and the greatest addiction crisis in human history. Plato noted 2,500 years ago that when societies contract, addictions of all kinds ramp up. And that's what we're seeing. And you combine that with climate change, abrupt climate change, like 10,000 years of climate change in half a human lifetime. And we're looking at a time when we can all be the saints, sages, heroes, and sheroes that always appear in times of contraction, but we get to do that in local ways in our little communities, such as Cleveland. And for me, Ypsilanti, Michigan. Thank you.